2023. Thank you for being here. Tonight's agenda is a series of public hearings on a couple different projects that are before us. So what the council normally does is this is an opportunity for us to learn, to listen, and so we do not anticipate taking any action tonight, but we do anticipate an opportunity to learn and to hear from people. So that being said, I know this sounds loud. I hope it doesn't sound as much loud up there as it does up here. Our first item up is a public hearing on conditional district zoning for 171 Monticello Road. And Planning Director Eller, could you give us an update on this project?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. The annexation petition submitted for 171 Monticello Road was accompanied with a conditional district application. What that conditional district now proposes is a multifamily apartment complex consisting of 156 units and various amenities located on approximately 10.5 acres. Tonight's public hearing has been duly advertised in accordance with state law and municipal ordinance. The developer held a community meeting all the way back in mid-November. A report of that community meeting that, of course, is requisite of conditional districts was made available to council back in December. We continue to have that on file. It's not in your packet of information now, just to reduce the size of the packet. Based upon comments received from the council, the planning board, and the community, a revised plan was submitted back in December 16th, and that was the plan that the planning board considered and offered their recommendation to you on. Speaking of that recommendation from the planning board, it was unanimous. Based upon that site plan just noted, it does include conditions that they found necessary to address some concerns that were noted. I think Jennifer's going to walk us through some of those recommendations in just a little while. Lastly, I'd like to note that LDG now proposes a newly revised site plan dated January 9, 2023. Comes with some minor modifications to the site plan the planning board based its recommendation on. At this point, I understand that the developer would like to make a bit of a presentation this evening. This may be the appropriate spot for that. Happy to answer any questions that we may have at this time.
Does anyone have any questions for the planning director? No. Mr. Cox, do you want to make a presentation on your revisions to your project?
Yes, thank you. Land and compatibility development. Very short presentation, just to go over some of the changes since the last slide in October. I'll note that the name of the community is Weaverville, which is why you might see that word on the slides going forward. The first line is just a comparison that I think is visually useful to kind of see how the site has evolved based on Gerald's feedback from the planning board, continued conversations with neighbors, and quite a bit has changed. And if you go to the next slide, we can go into a little detail. Notably, there have been a lot of changes. I think the most notable ones are kind of there summarized in the box on the left. We've shrunk the density from 168 units down to 156 units. Doing so allowed us to consolidate 7 buildings into 5 and accomplish a lot of some of the goals that the development had set for us. Most notably, I would point out the setback of the buildings from the western neighbors. We were able to put the drive aisle between the proposed buffer and the buildings, increasing. I have some numbers up here that are for the pool setback and the building setback. I should say I measured those, so those aren't exact numbers, but they're approximate. But you can see that there's we've I think gone to considerable lengths to try to increase the space between the neighbors and what we're proposing. Maybe the one metric that went in the opposite direction I do want to point out are the parking spaces. The site layout, as you see it here, has a parking ratio of 1.38, which is less than I think you will see in October, but is a number that we find is is a reasonable number, and it is not unusual for our community. So we don't think that that ratio is low, but it has come down. I did want to point that out. And I wanted to note the unit mix change. So because we went from 168 to 156, for that and a couple of other reasons, the unit mix have changed a little bit. So I don't do a very good job of totaling the numbers on there, so I'll just tell you. So the number of 30% AMI units have stayed the same, the 58 units. The number of 60% units have gone down from 52 previously to 29 now, and the number of 8% units have gone from 58 previously up to 69 now. So 30% have stayed the same. Some of the units have shifted from the 60 to the 80% AMI range.
What about the breakdown for the 1 to 2, 3 bedrooms? Do you have that somewhere?
So I don't know what the previous mix was off the top. I know the current one, and it would be roughly the same. The current one is 24 one-bedroom units, 72 two-bedroom units, and 60 three-bedroom units. I can provide that information. Of course, if I was good at math, I would just do it right on the screen, but I've exposed myself. For being a poor math student, you got it.
That works.
So there are a couple of zoning conditions that I wanted to kind of note proactively before we get into them. One is about the sidewalks. We've looked at hard at the options available to us to get our residents across and over to the shopping center. It's something that's important to us, and I know that it's important to you all. I provided a really poor illustration that's supposed to show that there are potentially several options available to us, and the fact is we just don't have enough information at the moment to know what the best option is available to us. And even when NCDOT would offer, they've given us some guidance to this point, but there's not much they can do without having a full traffic study in hand, which we don't have in hand at the moment. We can't provide it. And so what LDG has proposed is contributing $150,000 as a fee in lieu of the installation of committing to the installation of that sidewalk network, as we had described it before, being along our parcel boundary, going north along Monticello Road. As I say, we don't know if that would be the best route or what the best option would be to us. And because there's so many unknowns, we would like to propose contributing that money to a fund that would go toward future improvements of pedestrian access along the road. Which LDG would be happy to continue to participate in moving forward. And then we would also propose dedicating a right of way for sidewalk space along our parcel if it is determined that the best way to get across over to the shopping center is along the north side of Monticello Road, then that money could be used to create the sidewalk that we had discussed back in October. And then and $150,000, just so you know, we gave that number. That's what we believe would be a reasonable amount to give to build the sidewalk along our parcel boundary, as well as the parcel to the north of LDG. And potentially the crossing as well, depending on what NCDOT would request. So that's the explanation behind that. You can go to the next slide. So there's a condition related to the affordability of the community. LDG's intention is to build 100% affordable community with the affordability set aside that we just seen a couple of slides back. However, it's all contingent on funding from the county, and at this point, that funding is not awarded until May. Since we originally started the project in January, many millions of dollars of costs have been added to the project from rising interest rates and construction costs. So we're going back to the county to ask for additional funding. If we receive the funding, which we are confident that we will, we feel strongly hopeful, we're optimistic that we will. The project will move forward as we propose. This condition is really intended to protect in the event that, for whatever reason, we aren't able to get the funding, we could still build a community that would provide income restricted units. And we propose 50% of those be set aside for folks that make no more than 80% of the area's median income. And we think that would be something that would allow us to, and that's kind of a traditional workforce housing model. So it would allow us to move forward with the project in the event that you know, for whatever reason, the funding didn't come through. So that was the thought behind that.
So it would still all be affordable housing, it's just you just shift a certain percentage towards the 80% of.
No, instead of having 100% of the units
Right.
with income restrictions, half of the units, 50% of them would have income restrictions. And those restrictions would be for folks, for households that earn no more than 80% AMI. The other 50% of the units would be market.
Would be market rate.
But I should note a couple of things about that. I think maybe of most interest to you all, that would not be a community that is afforded real estate property tax relief. So it would be taxed as a standard community. And I didn't note on here either, we proposed that the affordability restriction be 30 years. That's what it is typically with other local government agreements.
Would you repeat that when you were talking about the tax part?
So we've talked about how we anticipate the affordable community
Right.
would be entitled to tax relief. If we didn't get the funding in May and we shifted to the workforce model that I described, where half of the units are income restricted and the other half are not, that is not something that would qualify the state's law for tax relief. It would be basically a market rate community that we've just voluntarily restricted the income limits on units. So in other words, it would pay the same taxes and that other apartment communities do.
Thank you.
But we won't know this, you won't know until May,
No,
which
no.
means we won't know until
Right.
June.
Well, I think if we would know, it's formally awarded in May, I think we would, from feedback from the county, we would probably have a good sense of how it was going to go, maybe a little before that, but as soon as we knew, you all would know, so I would say that. You can go to the next slide. Oh, that's us.
Quick question on and maybe this is for James and Jennifer, on the proposal on the sidewalk, I'll call it escrow, and the approach. How do you feel about both how that protects our interests and keeps us mutually working together, and also the proposed cost? Any feelings?
I would say that fee in lieu is fairly common in other ordinances, especially with larger jurisdictions. Most of them will offer that option rather than actual construction. So we are comfortable that if the interest of council is to ensure that those sidewalks get installed, that this is an avenue to make sure that that occurs.
But what I heard him say was they wouldn't go ahead and put the sidewalks even in front of their existing, like everything that we have now, even if it's a sidewalk to nowhere, they go ahead and put the sidewalk in front of their development or business kind of thing. This 150,000 saying they're not gonna put sidewalks, period, right?
So what we, going into the planning board meeting, what was agreed, I think is highlighted in your all's packets, is that we were going to install them across the frontage of our parcel, kind of we had always discussed, and then because there were the unknowns, we would put another number on the side and as a fee for future improvements that were off site. And speaking with James and Jennifer, and this gets back to that terrible picture I put together there. What I was trying to show is it might be that for example, the best way to get folks over to the shopping center would just be to put a crosswalk in just directly from the northern or southeastern edge, I guess, of the site, maybe not. And so what she suggested is predict how much money it would cost to put that in, that sidewalk. Go ahead and set that land aside for an easement for a sidewalk, a right of way for a sidewalk, so that it could go there. But instead of using the money to install that sidewalk, which might not be the best use of each dollar, let's put it in this fund that can be used once we have a better sense of how best to allocate it.
In other words, the sidewalk still gets built, it just depends on which plan DOT finally approves, and what they're proposing to do is put the money into an escrow account for us that will cover the cost of whichever route ends up being the final decision. And I guess one decision I would want to know is do we believe this amount is adequate to construct the sidewalks?
I'm gonna let Mr. Pennell correct me if I'm wrong, but he and I did some figuring, and he believes that, well, let me say this, until the sidewalk is located and designed, we don't know what the cost is gonna be, because we don't know how many stormwater inlets are gonna be needed, whether it's just straight 5-foot sidewalk running, however many feet. So there are lots of variables in that, and they're just not knowable at this point. And so we're kind of stuck with understanding town council's desire to have this sidewalk and trying to figure out the best way to try to make that happen with all the unknowns. And so Mr. Pennell, I believe, is of the opinion that if it's just straight concrete work, it's about $200 per lineal foot. And so $150,000 gets 750 feet of straight sidewalk, which is more than enough. If you look at where he's proposing to come out, the pedestrian exit from their project up to that intersection, that's probably more like 500 feet. And again, I'm using very rough numbers.
Right.
But he also expects that there will be some money that's going to be needed to get across the street for the crosswalk. And so I think we don't know, but I think it's a reasonably accurate guess as to that amount.
Okay.
And again, just to comment a little bit on, if you look at where the pedestrian exit from the property is, and then look to the left, I think it felt like there was a lot of sidewalk that was really probably not going to be used necessarily, and so the money was going to be better spent to actually get folks into that shopping center. But they are willing to go ahead and reserve the sidewalk easement all in front of their property in the event that later it's determined that it's needed on that.
Right.
So to answer your question, it's a best guess, and I will clarify one point. I think what is now proposed that Mr. Cox just kind of laid out for you, which is a change from the condition that the planning board sent you. And that is, instead of that money going into an escrow account, it would actually be paid to the town of Weaverville and put into a sidewalk fund, so that those funds become town of Weaverville funds, and so we don't have to seek any other approvals besides DOT in order to get that, to use that money for sidewalk purposes.
Got it.
Very good.
Great, thanks.
Are there any more questions from Mr.
Yeah.
Cox?
I would be curious as to how you came up with 150,000.
So actually, we have an internal general contractor that gave me a number that was, it was basically a compromise number between girls and ours, computing it based on our internal math, which I don't have the details in front of me, I got to it, it was 135 or something like that, and so I rounded up, not very scientific, I rounded up to 150. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Is there room on the lot the terrain would allow for an overflow parking area if you get complaints a year into this that there is 1.3, it's just not enough?
So At the moment, at 1.38, but at the moment, there's not. And the reason really comes down to those retaining walls. It's an extremely steep, expensive site to build a community on. And we really, I asked our civil engineers when we started out to do a couple of things. We have to have at least 156 units. It was our company's minimum, now it's higher than that. But at the time, 156 units. It's as many parking spots as you put in there because the state housing agency has a minimum, that's the same minimum that the city has. I think yours is 1.75, that's what the states are. So it always, I do everything I can to get as close to that number as I can. Sadly, because of where we need to position those walls to keep the site costs, keep the project feasible because of the site costs, those walls are pretty restricted as to what we can do. So literally been told we can't fit another parking, a single spot anywhere else on them. So.
My concern is the last meeting when we were told that the way that the rules are written, you can allow 2 people per bedroom. So in a 3-bedroom unit, there could be 6 people living there. And they may or may not be children. So they might drive.
Sure. All I can point to are LDT's other communities, and this is, the parking ratio is a question that comes up all the time, and I'm always asking our property management companies to approve our ratios based on historic use of our communities. They've all felt comfortable with numbers this. In fact, they felt comfortable with numbers lower than this in some circumstances.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Cox? Thank you.
Okay, Joel.
Are there any members of the public who have signed up for this? Yes.
As I transition to the podium to grab our sign-up sheet, I would like to take the opportunity to ask anyone attending remotely who wishes to offer public comment to use the raised hand function on Zoom.
Mr. Mayor, while he's getting the sign-up sheets, did you want, at some point, I'd like to go through the conditions with you, see if there are any questions, and highlight just a couple of things that have been updated.
Why don't you go and do that? If you would.
Let me do that now. Stop sharing, Actually, I'm not sure that I need to do. So in your packet, you've got a set of conditions which were tied to the planning board's recommendation. Again, the conditions are those things that the planning board felt like were important in order to mitigate some of the impacts that this development we're going to have on the neighbors in the community. So that's why we're talking about this. Just a couple of things that we probably will need to change. We need to update, since we now have a January 9th, 2023 dated site plan, we'll update that. We do propose to add a condition that is a very obvious one that says that the maximum allowed number of residential units in the project is 156. That was already on the site plan, but we felt like it was probably important just to make that very, very specific. They have carved off a bigger portion towards the back and designated that as open space. And just so that no one is confused, staff felt like we should add a condition that says that the property shall not be eligible for subdivision, which means that at some point in the future, probably not this property owner, but perhaps somebody in the future, they would not be able to lock that back part off and develop that in the back. We've already talked a little bit, more than a little bit, about the pedestrian safety, so we'll come back to that at another time. We proposed to add some sign regulations that are consistent with your current regulations that would say they would have one large freestanding sign, development sign, and then some internal directional signs that with some limitations. So we've added that. We've added a provision that says that the project is subject to a final review by the town's technical review committee prior to issuance of any permits. And then potentially adding a condition that says that the zoning will be valid for 5 years from the date of approval, with building permits obtained within that 60-month period. But if they fail to get a building permit within that period of time, then the zoning goes away. So just sort of a sunset on this. And so those are the, besides kind of how we deal with the sidewalks, those are just some, I think, some fairly minor additions really to the work that the planning board did. And I would offer those as additional conditions for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for the attorney? We do have a couple of members of the public who want to speak on this issue. Peter Stans. Oh, excuse me, Peter, I'm mistaken. You're on the next public hearing, excuse me. No one signed up. You wanted to speak on the annexation issue? Is that correct? That's the next, I'm sorry, we're talking about the zoning at this point. Sorry, I called you at the wrong time. So there are no members of the public who have signed up to speak on this. Are there anyone online who wants to speak?
I just would note that we did have 2 comments that came in advance in the form of an email. Those were distributed to town council a little bit earlier today.
And there's no one online that we see with their raised hand?
Not encountered any raised hands.
Okay. That's the case. This public hearing is closed, and we'll go to our next public hearing, which is.
Mr. Mayor, there is someone that has a hand raised. I'm sorry, did I sign up? Was there 2 places?
You signed up for you're signed up for the next hearing on annexation. Okay, it's coming. The next public hearing is on annexation of 171 Monticello Road. Anthony Jackson, you want to prep that for us?
Yes, sir. This is a contiguous voluntary annexation petition that has come in for the 10.68 acres that we were just talking about for the 171 project. Would note, would note for you that the town clerk in previous action has certified that the annexation petition is sufficient, meaning all of the property owners that are on this property have properly signed the petition, and it does qualify for contiguous annexation. This hearing on the annexation of this property was advertised in accordance with North Carolina law. We do have this affidavit, so if anybody needs to verify that information. I think that's it for me. Mr. Eller has prepared a staff report, and now might be a good time to hear from him on what your department heads have to say regarding this annexation.
Mr. Eller, you're up.
Thanks, sir, again. So as we always do, we collected information for council from each of our individual departments. Most of the information from the zoning perspective has already been covered tonight by virtue of the public hearing that was just conducted. That being said, Attorney Jackson just noted that it would be contiguous annexation. We don't have any satellite concerns there. With the population per unit given to us by the 2020 census, we can anticipate that this will add approximately 334 people to town. We have a statement on comprehensive land use plan compliance and reasonableness that the planning board's offered comment on as well. You'll have some information from the police department where they calculate additional fuel cost and maintenance, staffing hours associated with the development. We have a statement from your fire department suggesting that due to the unique nature of the town's fire department, as well as them serving as the North Welcome Fire District, that this development will be served by the folks at the fire department way. And of course, from Public Works, you have some information related to water, streets, stormwater, parks, and other things from their perspective. So this is an indication of what it is that your individual departments will encounter based upon the type of development that we anticipate should this property be annexed into the town. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Question, do we want the number of units to match the zoning application?
Have we found a discrepancy, the old number?
Yes. In the Lisa packet, I have 168, so.
I'll make sure to correct that. That's probably a reflection of the evolution of the project. But absolutely, that unit count will be in the ordinance as well as the plan that's adopted with the ordinance.
Any other questions for the attorney or the planner? Good deal. There are a couple of members of the public who wanted to speak on this issue. Peter stands. I mean it this time, Peter.
Peter Stands, 49 Brown Street. I'm assuming that this annexation includes water, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So we're talking about 30,000 or more gallons per day for this development. And I'd like to know when town council is going to hold on annexation and deal with the water issue.
And the second speaker we have is Eileen Reichman. I hope I got your name correctly. I still didn't get it right?
No, it's German, the second found. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I appreciate the new site plan, it looks much better. The neighbors are very happy to have distance. It was one of our concerns, things that we've spoken about. I just want to share a couple other things that I hope that we can look at before this happens. But I will say, I just off the top of my head, changing this to 50% of them being market value is no longer affordable housing complex. And then we're gonna add to the density because it was affordable housing was like, to me, one of the biggest points. And if that's gonna change, I don't understand how we could approve, or you, or whatever, that could be approved. We already know that Weaverville is so overgrown. We know that development is happening. That's been some of the comments that I've always heard. It's gonna happen. I came to this first meeting, I got emotional, and it was because I was mad that I felt like everything was decided, because I had found out 4 days before about this question of water, and now it's evolved to this. And now we don't know, there's so many unknowns. And I don't know how you can say that. I do want to share, I attended the first planning meeting. I used to serve on the zoning board in Woodfin, so I understand how some of those decisions are made. Some of it's black and white, but some of it's not. I was a little disappointed. I felt like Jennifer Jackson and James Eller have been so neutral, so many times like avoiding answering a question, having an opinion. But that meeting was very leading the whole time to the committee who was looking at these papers for the first time or short period of time and looking at pictures. During the meeting, they talked about the undisturbed buffer, the 20 feet plus the additional 15 feet, and Mr. Eller said at least 3 times that this was almost double the minimum of 20 feet. That's not double, that's 75% more. And he never once offered that they could make the buffer bigger. I mean, it's a conditional zoning. You can take that option. That was never mentioned. When discussing the density, Ms. Jackson said multiple times that this was allowed in the county. Again, it was very leading, and it is setting a precedent. You're making it denser than anything else in Weaverville. I don't see how that is not considered. One of the board members asked, how do we know what the consequences are for something that is 30% denser than the 12 units an acre? We don't. You don't have an answer for that, other than being told, by Ms. Jackson that, it's allowed in the county. I don't think that's a sufficient answer to know when everything is growing so fast. I also want to note that the meeting in November that was required, a public meeting, was supposed to be with written notice. We were told that LDG sent out 75 notices. Not one person in Rolling Acres received written notice. 0 to this day. You're all aware of this, and I would like to know what's going to happen about that. I'll email you the rest. I have several more things I'm concerned about. And my one thing is, you know, in light of all this is most likely going to pass, maybe the board, along with the zoning board, could do some planning with the county. Why aren't we colluding together on bordering properties so that when zoning issues come up, we're not complaining because it gets changed? You know, we know it's gonna grow. This is the perfect opportunity. And why not hold the density requirements when we know, like the water system, all the things people are concerned about are gonna be affected?
Thank you very much. So I'm closing the second public hearing. Yes? Yes, oh, I forget about.
I'll take the opportunity to ask if anyone online attending remotely would like to offer public comment. And scrolling through our attendees a couple times at this point, I do not see any raised hands.
Thank you. Thank you for continuing to remind me that we have an audience online as well. Since there is no more to discuss on this item, I'm closing public hearing number 2 on the annexation of 171 Monticello Road, and we're opening the public hearing number 3, which is zoning for the development at 480 Reams Creek Road. And Mr. Eller, can you bring us up to date on this one?
Absolutely. I'm going to give everyone some patience while I get all the various things in. So much different than what we just encountered with the conditional zoning proposed at 171 Monticello Road. What we have here is a voluntary annexation petition that carries with it an initial zoning request of R3. What we know is that the R3 zoning district will allow for high-density, single-family residential development, as well as multifamily development, both at a clip of 8 units per acre. Tonight's public hearing, as well as the previous 2, has been advertised in accordance with state law. The planning board offers a favorable recommendation on R3 for the properties, and has found the R3 zoning to be consistent with the comprehensive land use plan. Town council has recently adopted a resolution addressing growth area 5, and the proposal for R3 zoning is reasonable. As part of the hearing, staff will formally present the planning board's findings and recommendation. That include your packet of information available for this evening. We're happy to offer any comments or answer any questions that you may have, but that's my introduction for the 480 River Street Road design.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone have any questions for the planning director?
Have they given us any kind of inclination as to how many would be 2 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms?
We do not.
No, okay.
And I think it's important to note that if the R3 zoning is passed for the property, then any development that meets the requirements of the R3 zoning district can be achieved on the property, so we don't,
Right.
like the conditional zoning that we just experienced, we don't dive into that level of detail.
I understand. I just didn't know if we might know.
Do we have anyone who signed up to from the public to speak on this issue?
While he's doing that, I do believe that one of your emails today was a written comment
Yes.
that was on this one. So I just wanted to note that for the minutes as well.
We do not have anyone signed up for either the zoning or the annexation, so again, I'll ask if anyone attending remotely wishes to make a public comment, again, this being 480 Reams Creek zoning, if they would make their intentions known by raising their hand. And again, scrolling through a few times, I do not see anyone attending remotely who wishes to offer comment.
Thank you. Hearing all of that, I close the public hearing for the zoning of 480 Reams Creek Road, and we'll open up the public hearing for annexation of the same property at 480 Reams Creek Road. And Attorney Jackson, can you tell us what you know?
Yes, sir. Ricky Lee Ponder and Dennis Russell Ponder are the owners of 3 properties encompassing about 17.4 acres on 480 Rings Creek Road. And some of those parcels are unaddressed, but in that area. They did, this is Rings Creek Road near the intersection of Pleasant Grove Road. They have submitted a voluntary annexation petition for these properties, which are contiguous to the town's municipal borders. The town clerk has previously certified the sufficiency of the annexation petition, and so this request is now eligible for public hearing. This public hearing has been advertised in accordance with North Carolina law, and so it's appropriate to receive public input at your discretion. I do believe that Mr. Eller has a staff report on this one, just like he did on the previous.
Keller?
So what we can anticipate under R3 zoning is development of approximately 139 units. And that's, again, the acreage present multiplied by the 80 units per acre that R3 will allow. Other considerations, should you wish to annex this property and give it the R3 zoning requested, it'll add approximately 300 people to the population of the town. And as Ms. Jackson noted, and similar to the previous hearings, this will be a contiguous annexation that goes through. Just like the previous project as well, you've got some information from your police department related to cost increase and what it is that the department will require to service the property. You know, statement from fire chief as well. And lastly, Director Pennell was over additional information on water, streets, stormwater, sanitation, so on and so forth. All of this information again aggregated from your various departments to give you guys an indication of what the town will require in way of service provision to the property. And you can answer questions as always.
Does anyone have any questions for either the attorney or the planning director? And do we have anyone online who has questions or comments? Okay, and we had no one who signed up to speak on this issue. So that being the case, I am closing the public hearing for annexation of 480 Reams Creek Road. Is there any other items that needs to come before this board this evening? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you.